How'd I do? Just like that? All right. Beautiful. All right, we'll hear from the prime sponsor, 142. Oh. Yeah. It was noticed this way. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, how are you, sir?
Very well, Senator. Thank you. Good morning, Senator and colleagues. Representative Michael Vose, Chair of House ST&E, representing Rockingham District 5, here this morning to introduce House Bill 142. House Bill 142, just to give you context, passed the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee by a vote of 18-2, and then passed the full House on a roll call vote of 269 to 109. A bipartisan bill. So what does HB 142 do? The simplest way to describe it, although it's a complex issue, simplest way to describe it is that it forgives a debt of about $50 million. What it actually forgives is an obligation to repay $48 to $50 million in overmarket energy costs. But a simple way to think about it is it just forgives a debt. Why does it do that? It does that because the debt that it forgives, or the obligation to repay this money, was actually created by this legislature with the passage in 2018 of Senate Bill 577. Senate Bill 577 suspended a provision in a purchase power agreement between Burgess Biopower and Eversource that said that when a $100 million critical CRF, which stands for, I've forgotten exactly what it stands for.
That's all right.
Let's see what my notes say here. Cumulative reduction factor, that's what it stands for. So there's a fund that's been accumulating over market energy costs beyond $100 million. And the legislature suspended the PPA's provision that money be paid back within a 12-month period after any over market energy costs started to accumulate. And then last year, with Senate Bill 271, we extended that suspension by an additional year. So this legislature essentially interfered with a contract, a PPA, by creating this suspension of an obligation to repay these funds, these over-market energy costs. Therefore, when we looked at the situation in trying to figure out what to do with House Bill 142, we decided that it was prudent to forgive that obligation to repay those costs. Since we created that $48 to $50 million bucket of funds, which the company cannot pay back, they just cannot afford to pay it back in a 12-month period as specified by the terms of the PPA, we just decided the prudent thing to do was to forgive that obligation to repay. Now, it does interfere with the PPA, the terms of the PPA. Nevertheless, we felt it was the right thing to do. Since we created this problem in the first place, we would fix the problem by forgiving this obligation to repay. That is essentially what House Bill 142 does. It does nothing else to the terms of the PPA. Therefore, the PPA becomes the primary instrument for governing what happens between Burgess Biopower and Eversource. And this is important to all of us because Eversource's ratepayers are directly affected by this PPA. Now, I've given you some written testimony that goes fairly deeply into the history of this situation. I can go through that this morning if you would like, but I would assert that maybe the best thing to do would be for you to ask me questions if you have any concerns about the bill, and we could proceed from there, because there are other people, I'm sure, who are going to want to testify on this bill. So that's how I would suggest we proceed. If that's okay with you, then I'll close my testimony there and happily accept any questions you might have.
Thank you for your testimony and for bringing the bill forward. Questions? Senator Pearl.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and testifying. So what happens if we don't forgive this?
So if we don't do this, at the end of the suspension period, which is November 30th of this year, the PPA, the Public Utilities Commission has ordered that the terms of the PPA have to be met. And the terms of the PPA are that any accumulated funds over $100 million have to be repaid over the next 12 months. So $48 to $50 million would have to be repaid by Burgess Biopower in the next 12 months. And that's a burden that they cannot bear. They will have to declare bankruptcy if they are required to pay that in the next 12 months.
Thank you.
Further questions? Senator Britzel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Did they agree to this PPA?
They did. They willingly signed the PPA. I think it was back in 2012, 2011, sometime in that time frame. And they have lived by the terms of the PPA ever since. The Public Utilities Commission had serious questions about this PPA when it was initially proposed. They're the ones who came up with the idea of creating the cumulative reduction factor to accumulate overmarket energy costs and pass those along to Eversource ratepayers. That's all part of the PPA. And PPAs, even though they're subject to Public Utility Commission approval, they are private contracts. And it's my feeling that the legislature should stay out of private business as much as possible.
Follow?
Can we extend out the payment plan so that it goes well beyond the November timeframe, so it'll lessen the payments?
You could ask that question of other people who will testify after me, but my understanding of the way the PPA is written is that it would require a renegotiation of the PPA in order to do that. That's possible, I suppose, but I don't know how likely that would be. And it would probably take some time to renegotiate that PPA, and I don't know if there's enough time, given that that November 30th is only, 6 months away, to renegotiate that PPA. Once you open a contract like that to renegotiate something, the likelihood that something else will get renegotiated is highly likely. So it's a problematic situation.
So the Burgess Power Plant, basically they generate 75 is it 75 megawatts of baseload power?
Yeah, a little bit less than that maybe, but
so if they went
close to
bankrupt,
that.
we would probably lose that.
Yes, I'd imagine if they went bankrupt, they'd cease operation, yes. But you can ask folks who'll testify after me about that.
Further questions from the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. If this is forgiven, and Burgess continues operating at a deficit, what comes next? If they can't make the payment now, they won't necessarily be able to continue operating like this. So I guess I'm looking for if, according to your timeline, the legislature gave an extension on payment, and now the next step is to ask for forgiveness of payment. And then where I'm concerned is the next step to continue subsidizing. What's the?
Thank you for that question. It's a good question. It's one that we debated long and hard in committee. if we forgive the 48 to 50 million that has accumulated beyond the 100 million, that resets the fund back to the 100 million cap. Any future overmarket costs will then have to be repaid as they accumulate within 12 months. You'll have to ask representatives from Burgess Biopower whether they think they can accommodate those additional overmarket costs that will get generated. Back in January, when we were paying fairly high rates for electricity, it looked positive that maybe there would be enough cash flow generated to cover those overmarket costs. Energy prices have fallen, natural gas prices have fallen as the quantities of natural gas available have increased. Now it maybe looks less favorable today than it did back in January, that they'd be able to accommodate these additional payments. But you'll have to talk to them to find out for sure what they think they can do.
Further questions? Seeing none. So I have Rep. Vos Rocks. Is that?
Rockingham 5. I don't rock.
I'm kidding. You want to join?
I'm not a rock star.
All right. Thank you, Rep. Thank you very much for your testimony. Kirsten from BIA.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Kirsten Koch, and I represent the Business and Industry Association. I'm here today to register BIA's opposition to House Bill 142. If we forgive these debts to the plant, this bill ultimately would continue to artificially inflate energy prices to preserve the operations of one business. We feel that this bill does not have the best interests in ratepayers in mind. I think Senator Altshuler was correct with her question in leading to that this bill would continue those subsidies. And you may hear testimony today that this is an additional cost of maybe $3 a month for residential ratepayers, but it's much, much greater for commercial and industry operations. And I just want to run through some numbers for you so you can see the expenses that this would cost. So say we take $3 a month for a residential ratepayer, assuming 600 kilowatt hours per month usage. For a 1 megawatt demand commercial and industrial customer with a 60% capacity factor, they would pay $26,000 a year more on their electric bill for this subsidy. If you take a 10 megawatt demand customer, this is over $260,000 more a year. That's a big difference when these businesses are looking at, do they want to expand here in New Hampshire, or would they rather expand their operations more in a different location in another state? And these are the type of issues that they're considering when they're looking at those plans. We want to keep those jobs here in New Hampshire. In addition, BIA, we acknowledge that the biomass plant is important to the city of Berlin, and we'd be happy to work with the committee on finding an alternative way to support the city and foster economic development in that region that doesn't come at the expense of New Hampshire ratepayers. So in conclusion, we ask you not to pass this bill at this time. It would just continue to increase energy costs at a time when they're already exceptionally high. Thank you, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Senator Altshuler.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for my question. So my question actually goes to your testimony. What does it mean to find alternate ways to support the city? So it's a lot of jobs lost. So what are your initial discussions with the chamber up there, and how is it beginning?
Thank you for your question,
Thanks.
Senator. I think that's something we have to work on as a committee. I know Berlin's concerned about losing that tax money. Is there something we can pull from the general fund to support the city? Are there other business avenues that we can take? You know, I think there's options on the table. We just have to figure out what's best for Berlin.
Further questions? Thank you very much for your testimony, Kristen.
Thank you.
Tom, DOE? Not in support, not opposed. Tom Frantz. Welcome. How you
Good
doing
morning,
today?
Senator Avard and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning on House Bill 142, and I'm going to direct my comments to the amendment. I am Tom Frantz, Director of the Regulatory Support Division at the Department of Energy. Prior to my current position in the creation of the Department of Energy, I was the Director of the Electric Division at the PUC. I want to say up front that we appreciate the efforts of Representative Vose and others to find a solution to this issue, and that during our audit of Burgess, the personnel there were at all times helpful and acted in a professional manner. House Bill 142 will provide some short-term breathing room for the plant, but the plant will, over time, in our opinion, and depending on market conditions, continue to face the struggle and the $100 million that's set there in the cumulative reduction factor, which I remind you was put there to protect customers against long-term over-market costs. And so it'll be challenged as market conditions change, and Representative Vose already mentioned those changing market conditions, to stay under the $100 million cap. What this amendment does is reset things back to about 2017-18 period, when they were basically waived the over-market costs for a 3-year period and then an additional 1-year extension. That's a call for you to make, but we take a neutral position on this bill, but I am here today to answer any questions you may have about the economics, the PPA.
Thank you for your testimony and for being here. Questions from the committee? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned that this bill would reset to 2017 standings.
18 period,
18. And but you also said will be continued to be challenged by market conditions. And
So
the observation is that market conditions have changed dramatically considering world events.
They have.
Yeah.
But as Representative Vose mentioned, and if you look at the ISO New England website, you can see that the short-term cost of power has again dropped. And the cumulative reduction factor is based on the energy costs in the short-term market at the node up there in Berlin against the price that is paid for the power based on the PPA. And that difference is then kept track of on an hourly basis throughout the year. So there are times when the plant is in the money, as it was for many hours this past winter. And then when you get into low periods of demand and low energy prices, the plant turns around and is over market, and it's just an accounting system to keep track of how much over and under it is throughout the period. So there'll be hours and days where it may be certainly beneficial for customers, and then there will be hours and days and weeks and potentially months where it will not be.
Your follow-up? All right. So, Senator Waters, you have a question? Yeah. Okay. Looking at it in a vacuum, we lose 75 megawatts or something to that effect, right?
It's about 67.5 net.
66. How necessary is that for our state to have that as a base load power?
I mean, we have well over 4,000 megawatts in New Hampshire, although that's probably going to be dropping in the near future potentially. 67.5 It's not a large amount, and I look at it more than New Hampshire. I also look at it as a regional basis because it's all tied to the transmission system.
Right.
33,000 megawatts, basically in the ISO New England region. It's a small plant. Important in its area, important for obviously the North Country and the wood industry, which I'm sure you'll hear lots about in a few minutes.
Right. Looking at it in a vacuum, just as for energy, but there is a timber industry that this supports, which keeps our forests clean, right?
Correct?
Yeah, and it does generate a timber tax, which, is that all put into the consideration?
It was in the approval of the PPA.
Yeah.
I testified on this PPA back in 2012, 11, 12, and that was part of the evaluation by the PUC to approve the PPA. It looked at the jobs. It looked at the effect on
The ripple effect, if you will.
correct.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Senator Waters with a question.
Yes, thank you, Tom. And so how many megawatts of power does New Hampshire use a year? Do you have a guesstimate on that number?
About 10,000, 11,000 megawatt hours.
Yeah, that's it. So I'm asking because we have from BIA,
Well,
we have from BIA the prediction that,
1.8 million megawatt hours, basically.
pardon?
Yeah, it's at about 1.8 million megawatt hours, I believe.
For the total for New Hampshire.
Actually, it's more like what I said before. Eversource is 7.8 million megawatt hours. The state's about 10.8 million megawatt hours.
Okay. So, and this is a 75 megawatt plant, more or less.
Yeah, and it produces about 500,000 megawatt hours.
So we're told by the BIA that as a result of Burgess, that a 10 megawatt demand customer would pay $262,800 a year more. And I was just trying to do the math that if you have, you know, those millions of megawatt hours, that are we actually going to be paying like $250 million more because of Burgess for the whole state?
Well, for Eversource's customers, every $7 million over market is about 1 mil per kilowatt hour. So if it's a large customer and with a high load factor, that's, you know, potentially tens and tens of thousands of dollars per year in additional costs.
Thank you.
I'll be happy to actually run the numbers and send them in to you. I can do some analysis for you and give you more detail. I'll be happy to provide that.
Yeah, I just, the figure here is a 10 megawatt hour demand customer because of Burgess would pay $262,000 more a year.
That's possible, actually, if it's a high load factor customer with a lot of usage.
Thank you.
That is definitely possible.
Further questions? Seeing none? Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Let's see, Paul from Paul Grenier from the city of Berlin. Berlin.
Flatlander.
Yeah. Berlin.
How you doing? Good, thanks. Well, thank you very much, Senator Avive, members of the committee. I've got some written testimony that I've handed all of you, and I also have a couple of points that I'd like to bring up after. My name is Paul Grenier, and I've been serving as mayor of the city of Berlin since January of 2010. I rise today in support of House Bill 142 for a few critical reasons. The most significant reason is the hugely positive impact that Burgess Biopower has had in our community and region since the plant was permitted in 2011. From a nearly 30-month construction cycle that employed at its height some 400 skilled tradesmen and apprentices, to a current employment estimate of about 200 statewide, Burgess delivered the jobs boost Berlin needed at such a critical time. Burgess Biopower is over and away Berlin's largest property taxpayer, largest Berlin Waterworks customer, and also represents 12% of Berlin's wastewater department's revenue. Losing Burgess Biopower's economic footprint in Coos County would have a devastating effect on Berlin's future, right at a time where our community is experiencing stability and growth. As you all know, Coos County is still sparsely populated with many large tracts of undeveloped land. The historic land ownership patterns have been a boon to New Hampshire's recreational economy, providing critical open spaces for families to enjoy life as it was meant to be. There is little left in New England's pulp and paper industry, the main driver of keeping forested lands open to the public for recreation. Commercial forest lands, however, need revenue. Cutting trees is critical to keeping forest floors clean and healthy, and is a tool to help prevent various diseases from destroying forests. Markets for the high-grade sawlogs and veneer depend on markets for low-grade wood and slash to make harvesting economical. Burgess Biopower is the largest buyer of low-grade wood and slash left. Removing Burgess from this market would destroy the forest products industry in our state and beyond. Landowners would be forced to remove tracts from current use and subdivide for development. The most attractive pieces of land would be removed from recreational access, rendering abutting lands useless for public use. Lastly, as we all witnessed in the last 18 months or so, energy prices have skyrocketed. Burgess Biopower is a homegrown generating facility. It is in fact in the top 5 baseload generating assets in our state and is environmentally state-of-the-art. I believe it would not be in the best interest of our state's ratepayers to allow this plant to shutter. Collectively, we need to find solutions to our energy issues. If any one of our larger generating facility in ISO New England's managing territory would experience a long-term energy outage in a peak usage period, we would certainly suffer rolling blackouts and power use restrictions. It would be an embarrassing public relations fiasco for all who allowed a 75 megawatt generating asset in our state to close. And I would just like to give you some of my opinions and my observations. Since energy prices have skyrocketed, I am also the finance director for our local hockey rink in Berlin. And I know that Eversource's contract purchase power for Burgess's electricity is, Eversource at the time got a really good deal. And through deregulation, Eversource sells their power in the day-ahead market, which really doesn't allow for the best use of that generating asset. I just went out for bid because we're a large commercial electrical user, and the best price I could get was 11.97 cents a kilowatt hour for power use at the hockey arena. And Burgess's power sold to public service is less than that. So with Eversource's default prices upwards of around 20 cents, I mean, in this building, we got to start doing the math. Are we ready to shut down a plant and destroy an economy in the poorest part of the state because people aren't willing to talk and figure this all out? So it's something that's very important to me in my county and in my community. And I just think, you know, egos are got to be checked. This has to be figured out because Burgess is on a 60-acre tract of land. And if we can get this thing figured out long term, there are huge development possibilities in Berlin with waste heat and electricity that could really benefit the city of Berlin. So I'm I'm glad that you're hearing me out. It's a little frustrating for me. Every 2 or 3 years, I'm going to come over here and play Russian roulette with an asset that is very valuable to the state of New Hampshire. I'll take any questions that.
So what happens to the wood if the power plant goes down? What happens to the trash wood? Where does that go?
It'll probably be left right in the forest.
And that turns into a timber box.
Yes. That used to be the, small trees, slash, that kind of stuff. The pulp mills used to take that because it was easier on the drums in their wood rooms, and you used to be able to make pulp with it. There's only 3 pulp mills left in New England.
So more than just power, it's also keeping our forests clean.
It's a huge economic cycle. And you touched upon timber tax. I served as a Coas County Commissioner for 20 years. And the reason most of those unincorporated places don't have property taxes and folks who have camps on them is because the timber tax pays the county tax of all these unincorporated places. And without a market for low-grade wood, you have no access to the fat trees who've been there for 40, 50, 80, 90 years.
So that could actually hurt the tourist industry as well, with the fact that our forests are now potentially burned or not be properly forested in disease.
Well, Senator Ava, I'm going to keep it in a simplistic terms, but I can tell you if I owned a 300-acre parcel of land that I used to be able to maybe cull 10 or 20 acres a year to generate revenue, that I also had a side revenue for the junk wood. You take that away, and I have no market for my saw logs. What am I going to do with those 300 acres? I'll be forced to subdivide. And if you're near water, or you're near some areas where it's attractive, I'll be able to subdivide. But mountains and peaks and river valleys where nobody wants, and if without access from roadways or hiking trails, you're going to see vast pieces of pristine land that will no longer have access to public recreation. It's a crime all the way around.
That's why I wanted to touch a little bit on the ripple effect. If you look at it just in a vacuum, obviously there's some benefits that translate into other areas in our state. It's not just energy.
You know what? When folks want to come from Nashua to Manchester and they want to come to the North Country, your blood pressure gets lowered by 20 points because you do activities that are in a vacuum. And you get to enjoy the beautiful forests and lakes that we have here. But it's because of the constant management of forest lands, mostly done by private landowners. And that's the key. It's not public lands that get managed. In fact, public lands is harder to manage than private lands. Because public lands, we have the Lake and Bagog Wildlife Refuge in Errol, and it takes an act of Congress to kind of stick there. Whereas private landowners do a fantastic job in managing their forests, because they're working forests.
Questions from the committee?
Senator Waters? Yeah, thank you very much. And Mr. Mayor, thanks for coming down today.
Thank you, Senator.
Your powerful testimony. So, as I hear what you're saying, you're supporting basically this bill to help out at this point. But then the larger question is, because the accrual of debt starts again, are we just kicking the can down the road with a potentially unsustainable cost? And what are your thoughts about that? About what advice you give us to maybe in this bill try to deal with the future issue?
Well, my preference would be to strongly encourage Eversource to sit down with Burgess and look at the contract. And are there areas where there could be some synergy in making this work? It seems to me when Eversource goes to the PUC and asks for a rate increase of around 20 cents, to 18, 20, 22 cents for default service, and I'm on default service just so I can track the price of electricity, and they're paying less than half of that to Burgess for their power, you know, and then Eversource goes in front of the PUC with a straight face and tells you we're not making any money on default service. I'm not that smart, but I know the difference between 10 cents and 8 cents and 22 cents. There's a window there to make this work.
Follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks, Mr. Mayor. So, is Berlin in community power?
We're looking at it now, where we've had some pretty strong discussions with two groups, because I think it's in the best interest of our ratepayers to at least look at it and pay attention. As you know, most commercial heavy users are not on default service. They have their own separate contracts with, you know, various providers that have been approved by the state. But, you know, the vast majority of residential users are still default.
So would you, yeah, if I may, would you think that if you were to join a community power coalition, that there'd be a potential for you to make some arrangement to get your power out of Burgess at
Yes.
a good rate?
Yes, but currently the way the contract is structured, Eversource must buy the output from the plant.
Yeah.
That's another area where I think with some types of fruitful negotiations, you know, we wouldn't have to be coming down here to discuss the difference between power being bought by Eversource, the day-ahead markets. I mean, these are all items that smart people can sit down at a table and figure it out, and we can all move on our merry way.
Thank you.
But the way it's currently structured, when this deal came down, power was high, and Eversource was not deregulated at the time. So they, you know, Mr. Long, president of PSNH at the time, saw Burgess as a good hedge to protect public service ratepayers. Well, with deregulation, we got kind of stuck on the shore with no boat.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions? Thank you very much, and we
Thank you, Senator Avard. It was a pleasure.
We appreciate Berlin.
Thank you.
All right. No. Meredith Hatfield? And you're neutral as well. Thank you.
Good morning, Senator Avard, members of the committee, Meredith Hatfield for the Nature Conservancy. And I did not check a box because we do have mixed feelings about this bill. We oppose writing off the additional debt that has been accrued. So we would support more direction to the PUC to open a docket, to look at different ways to treat the power. As the mayor just explained, the way Eversource is currently required to purchase the power and then resell it is what is creating that difference. And so we think it would make more sense to, in this legislation, give clear direction to the parties and to the PUC to look at other ways to use the power for ratepayers' benefits. And I would call to your attention, recently in Senate Bill 54, which would authorize new PPAs, you added language requiring that when the PUC reviews those PPAs, that they ensure that they are designed to minimize costs and maximize benefits to ratepayers. And it's possible that something that simple in terms of direction to the PUC could help change the way that the power is currently sold. We, as a environmental organization very focused on climate and clean energy and land preservation, we're certainly we share a lot of the concerns about land use and about proper forest management, but we're just concerned about the precedent of, you know, writing off that level of ratepayer funds, which could be invested in other things. And we're also concerned, as has been raised by several other folks, that this really doesn't provide a long-term solution, and that, you know, this could be coming back before you again in the future. And I did want to mention that we really appreciate Chairman Vosa's work. He did not talk about all of the time that he's put in to really learning about this PPA and how it works. And I will say, as someone who was part of that docket, I don't think we ever thought that we would reach the 100 million, let alone go over. But the fact that you all are grappling with how to address high energy costs, and then we have this plant that currently is quite below market compared to default service, it seems like a wasted resource, if you will, to not be able to take advantage of that for ratepayers. So I agree with prior speakers that while time is short and November is coming, that I think people getting around a table and really trying to figure out, how do we make this power worth more for ratepayers? I think that's a good direction to go in. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Sarah Boone? Is it Sarah Boone or Sava Boone? I don't know if that's an R or an A, or it's an R. Okay. And you represent Burgess Power Plant? I do. You are in support of this. I am.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak on behalf of Burgess Biopower. For the record, my name is Sarah Boone, S-A-R-A-H-B-O-O-N-E. I'd like to just start. I provided some written comments, but I'm going to speak just a little bit more generally. I'd like to just give you a little bit of background on the facility. As others have said, we are a 75 megawatt biomass power plant that's located in the heart of the city of Berlin at the site of the former Fraser paper mill. We're the fourth largest generator in New Hampshire and the largest renewable generator. We began operating in 2013, and we produce about enough energy to power 67,000 homes, which is about 10% of New Hampshire's homes. We provide reliable baseload power that runs on local fuel instead of out-of-state gas or fossil fuels. And we are the largest single buyer of biomass in the state. We purchase about 800,000 tons of low-grade wood per year from 154 different New Hampshire towns in all 10 counties across the state. And it's interesting that if you looked at a map of where our wood comes from, you probably would not suspect that the facility is actually located in northern New Hampshire based on what we procure from the southern region of the state. We make significant contributions to New Hampshire's economy. We support 240 jobs. We generate nearly $70 million in economic activity each year, and that equates to almost $1.4 billion over the life of the PPA. So I think that is important context to consider when you are looking at this bill and the future of the plant. You've heard from the mayor about our contributions to the city, and you'll hear from Jason Stock as well about our importance to the forest products industry, so I won't touch on those anymore. But I think it's important to recognize that we support energy independence and fuel diversity, especially in times like these where we are seeing major changes and fluctuations in the energy industry. And our contract price is stable over time. So I'm going to just jump in the Wayback Machine just for a minute and talk about why the facility was developed just briefly. So it was developed really for three reasons. The first would be environmental. It was developed to bring a large-scale renewable generation resource to the state in order to meet RPS standards because there were very few of those at the time. It was developed for economics, which was to bring an economic anchor to the North Country after the closure of Fraser Paper, which completely devastated the local economy. And it was developed to bring a price-stable form of energy. It was intended to act as a long-term hedge against fluctuating market prices. And I think that that's important to consider, especially as we look at what the market is doing lately. The PPA price was never intended to be the lowest cost generation, but it's sort of the same way you diversify your retirement portfolio, right? You make sure that you have a couple of things in there that are going to be steady over time to help even out the spikes when things go high or things go low. And that's what our contract price does. We've delivered on all of those objectives. You've heard that there is a clause in the PPA that is kind of putting operations at risk. It's called the cumulative reduction factor. It's important to note that it's a book entry. It's not an actual bank account with money sitting in it. And it compares Burgess's long-term fixed price contract against the very fluctuating day-ahead market price. And what I think is important to note is the CRF exists independent of the use of our power. So as others have mentioned, this contract was executed prior to divestiture. And at that time, our energy was purchased and it was incorporated into the overall default service mix. And it did act as that price hedge against fluctuations in the market. When divestiture occurred, it changed the dynamics of what Eversource was able to do with our power. So what happens now is they purchase our power at the PPA price and they sell it into the day-ahead market. We have no control over that transaction or of the associated ratepayer impacts. So if whether our power is sold for 5 cents or $500 has no impact on us. The CRF exists independent of that transaction. So regardless of how our power is transacted and what price impact that might have, our contract price is still compared against the day-ahead market price. So that is what we are looking at as a debt that we are addressing with this particular bill. So it's a nuanced issue, and you know there's certainly complicated elements to consider. But what we are trying to do with HB 142 is essentially, as others have said, reset the clock. This bill is very similar to the Senate version of SB 271 that was passed last year. That particular bill passed in this committee with a 5-0 vote, and it passed unanimously in the Senate on a voice vote. So we are looking for essentially exactly the same thing as what came through the Senate last year, and we are. We stand ready to work collaboratively with Eversource to resolve any issues with the PPA, and we encourage the Senate to support that effort. I think it's important to note that passing this bill is really necessary to avoid bankruptcy and to amend the PPA so that we can create some long-term certainty for the plant. As others have said, there is a great future ahead in Berlin, and there are some really exciting and interesting opportunities available to us should we be able to reach that long-term certainty. There's a biochar facility that is interested in co-locating alongside Burgess. That would use 300,000 tons of low-grade wood each year and could use some symbiotic wood handling infrastructure and some things of that nature. We're also working on a district heating system with the city that could significantly offset energy costs for users that are currently using fuel oil or propane to heat their buildings. And there's a number of other opportunities available to us as well, but the common denominator is that none of them are going to move forward unless Burgess continues to be in operation. So I will close there and be available for questions. Just again, reiterating that I know that these are complicated issues, and we stand ready to work collaboratively with all of the stakeholders to get to a long-term resolution.
Senator Waters with a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for coming down today. So on page 2 of the bill, lines 3 to 5, which is the moving forward provisions here. So we wipe out the accrual, and then the meter starts running again. Mm-hmm. What's your kind of anticipation of what that will do to your finances?
Well, I think that as Mr. Frantz mentioned, the DOE completed an audit of the finances, and I think the facility operates with relatively narrow margins, and I think that we are prepared to navigate what that would look like going forward, but we would certainly want to work to address if there are things that can be done within the PPA that would help make it a little bit more manageable to do so.
Oh, yeah, if I could follow up on that, because you do have in your letter, your testimony, should Burgess's output be used differently. So what I'm trying to get at is I do see some possibilities. Community power, the project that has the federal grants to do the system in Berlin and whatever else might come along. So I guess what I'm wondering is that I'm wondering whether what the heart of this is your ability to, even within the contract with Eversource, be allowed to establish purchase of power agreements that might be long-term with other entities.
And that's something that we would certainly want to take a look at. I think one of the things that is particularly challenging is that as the PPA currently exists, as I mentioned, that comparison between our contract price and the day-ahead market price continues to exist regardless of what happens with our power. And that mechanism is what is causing this financial issue. And I think addressing that particular problem is going to be an important part of a long-term solution.
One more for me.
Yep.
So, in that context, could you envision a way in which we could make that restart of the payments conditional upon a process? So they wouldn't start immediately, but they would start upon the completion of a process, whether it's through the PUC or through negotiations with Eversource or others or Community Power, to let you set that future path before that CRF payment kicks in.
We would certainly be open to discussing that, absolutely.
Thank you.
So my broad understanding of this, we had a great idea, saved up the northern part of the state because we lost our paper mills. Hey, let's build a power plant. We use that as a way to help the economy generate baseload power, create timber tax, a whole 9 yards worth of stuff. Then somebody comes up with a bright idea and says, hey, you know what? We need to deregulate after. So we created the problem by legislating a deregulation. And now we're saying, hey, sorry, we set the rules and then we changed them on you, and now tough luck. And so the idea really is to come up with a way to help you and the North Country survive, keep our forests clean, and whatnot. And I like your analysis, diversity, and that you got in your portfolio things that make a lot of money, things that don't. But it all works for the state. But my heartburn is the fact that we switched gears on you, and we did it. We say, hey, this is a great idea, let's do this, and then we changed the rules, and the rules did not comply with what we set as the groundwork. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all I needed to hear. Yes. Thank you. Further questions, Senator Burtzel? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. What percentage of wood does Burgess use?
Just call him. He's not on the list.
What is the percentage of New Hampshire wood that Burgess uses?
Sure. It's typically about 55 to 60%.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. Mike, I notice you're here. Got any comments? You didn't sign up to speak, but we'd like to hear from you. A lot.
Good morning, Michael Licata, representing Eversource Energy. As the chair said, Eversource did not sign in, and we are neutral on the bill as passed by the House. However, happy to answer any questions to the best of my ability that the committee may have.
Senator Waters with a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and thanks for coming up. So you heard my little colloquy with Sarah Boone. So, kudos to Eversource for the long-term contracts and stabilizing things, and times have changed, things change, and so on and so forth. But in your opinion, is there a way for some discussions to occur that would enable what I was describing, so that in the context of your contracts, there could be other contracts for that power, so that they could, whether it's CLC or whether, some other mechanism, or does that just too much upset the apple cart of Eversource's long-term
Yeah,
contract.
Not an attorney, and don't want to get too far out over my skis. However, I would be happy to share that concept with our team. I don't know. Obviously, I can tell you that the current terms of the PPA would not allow such sub-arrangements. However, as I said, I'm happy to bring that back and try to get a response.
If I may follow up, is that something that we would have to go through the PUC with, or is it, I mean, I kind of think we might, but.
Any change at all to the purchase power agreement would require commission approval.
And if I just one minute more, in that context, they reference the phrase in 54, Senate Bill 55, put in there the minimize costs, maximize benefits to ratepayer. How do you feel about that context for any kind of contracts going forward related to Burgess? Does that help or not? Is it or not?
Can you explain? I don't have a copy of the testimony, so I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, we had mentioned from Meredith Hatfield that phrase of, including that phrase, minimize costs, maximize benefits to ratepayers might be a helpful context in whatever kind of PPAs are involved with Burgess. Does that make sense to you, or would that?
So Senate Bill 54 obviously has to do with forward-looking potential contracts. We have a contract in place, and I would just note, I know there's been much discussion about the change in the market, electric restructuring, the challenges of the accumulation in the CRF due to how the power is treated and the comparison to the day-ahead market. I would just note that this was a lengthy, and obviously it was before my time at the company, but a lengthy process that was, had significant concerns raised by a number of different stakeholders, and a delicate balance was achieved to get approval of that PPA. So to say, there were a lot of different folks who had different interests who were involved in the approval of that PPA, and ultimately the final product was what was able to get approval, and even that was subject to an appeal to the New Hampshire Supreme Court until that appeal was subsequently withdrawn. So there's a lot of history here, I guess, is what I'm saying, about how this came to be.
Senator Pro with a question.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in and taking my question. I've been in the legislature during all this, but I can't say that I've had a deep understanding of it. So we're looking to take what is essentially $150 million debt that's on paper and reduce it down to $100 million. Who's paying the $50 million? Where does it go? If we pass this, what happens?
So when the legislature stepped in and suspended the CRF, so the accumulation of the above market costs, which under the purchase power agreement were capped at 100 million, we continue to accumulate those additional costs. And we did receive regulatory approval to get recovery of those costs from customers through what is known as the stranded cost recovery charge. So in effect, customers have already, through their electric bills, through the stranded cost recovery charge, paid for that $50 million and continue to do so through their bills.
So if we don't pass this bill, who's benefiting from that $50 million that's sitting someplace?
Right. So if this bill is not passed, then as Representative O said, the terms of the PPA go back into effect, which says that Burgess Biomass has to reduce the cost of their power that they charge Eversource, our customers, to account for paying back that $50 million. And so that would then flow back to customers. So essentially customers would be made whole.
I appreciate it.
Senator Bressler, you've got a question? No further questions. Thank you very much. Appreciate you stepping up to the plate. Catherine Courtney from the New Hampshire Sierra Club.
Morning. Thank you for letting me speak. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to. My name's Catherine Corkery. I'm from New Hampshire Sierra Club. And I really appreciate the conversation today and the efforts of those involved. Sierra Club has, in the past, opposed this bill, these efforts. And we, as the bill is written now, we still oppose it. It really misses the mark. Here we have $50 million being wiped away that ratepayers have paid. And that $50 million could have been used for all sorts of things in the renewable energy field. And with this bill, we're talking about an energy source that gets less than 25, and that's being generous. 25% of the energy. It's a very low production of energy from wood. We also have emissions to get the wood to the plant. We heard about 50 to 60% comes from New Hampshire. The other part does not. We also, this bill does not require any additional emissions reductions or improvements. We heard that this money was collected from ratepayers. The other piece I wanted to point out is that other renewables have not been granted such grace. And I don't think they have, and I really don't see it in the future. And the other piece was other economic improvements are available. Certainly, just thinking creatively, this 50 million. If this committee wanted to change the existing PPA or ask the PUC to do that, and I think that's what I'm hearing here. That is really unprecedented. But moving forward, okay, what would you do? Could you shift the PPA to require Eversource to do more energy efficiency or other renewable energy? I'm really surprised to see and to hear the possibility of changing an existing contract to benefit a business. I'm really surprised to hear that. As written, Sierra Club does oppose this bill. Ratepayers are suffering from the high rates right now, and here was an additional cost on top of the increased rates. This was a stranded cost for Eversource, and this $50 million, that's a lot of money. So thank you, and I will conclude there. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Let's see here. We have, I'm going to guess at this. It looks like L-U-I-S, Louise? I don't know what that is. Lisa. Lisa?
Oh,
Louise. Louise? All right. Seeing not here, we're going to be running it short of time, so. Louise. All right, and Louise? Do we have a Louise? All right. Louis? Lou. Figueria?
Oh, I think you signed the wrong one.
Oh.
Is with the lobster.
Oh, okay. And my last speaker is Jason Stock. Yeah, we're gonna get kicked out again at 12 o'clock, so we need a different room. What's that? Gotta get it done. Everybody else gets to.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Jason Stock, the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Timberland Owners Association. And coming around is a copy of our testimony. This is the testimony we provided to the House Science and Tech Committee, and it's as applicable today as it was a month or two ago. And I wanted to just touch on a couple points and really emphasize why we support this bill. As has been mentioned, by way of background, we represent timberland owners in the state's forest products industry. Our members own or manage about 1 million acres in the state of New Hampshire, and that acreage comes in all shapes and sizes, from 20-acre tree farms to institutional ownerships up in northern New Hampshire. So, and our members are are committed to sustainable forestry, and part of that is having markets. It's quite simply, if you want to conserve and protect something, you add value to it. And if you have value to forest and the prospects of growing trees and managing for healthy forest and healthy timber, if there's value to that, people will do it. And so from our forest, we have a $2.5 billion industry in the state of New Hampshire. A lot of people are surprised at that number, but we don't have big fancy factories along the river, along the interstate. All our economic activity occurs out in the forest or in small towns across the state at sawmills and in Berlin at the power plant. Annually, and I provided in my testimony DRA's timber tax data. Annually, last timber tax cycle, 2,226 timber sales occurred across the state. And what's interesting to note is when you look at the products that are harvested, and this breaks it down by county, it occurs all across the state. And biomass is an important product. That product, the top 3 counties are Grafton County, Carroll County, and Merrimack County. Merrimack County produces a lot of biomass. It's an important timber state, or timber county, I should say, as is Hillsborough County and, of course, Sullivan and Cheshire. Although Cheshire is known more for its saw logs and beautiful red oak, biomass is produced statewide. And so when we look at Berlin and the impacts of this facility, it is truly a statewide economic impact. And that's why we're interested in, that really draws our interest to the bill. When we look at Roman numeral 2 on page 2, when we look at lines 6 and 9, where we talk about economics and the economics of this facility to the state, and the public interest. Because we do think this facility, as you heard in prior testimony, does serve a public interest. Baseload renewable power. This is power that comes from literally our backyards. It's not being imported on ships from offshore. It is literally from our backyards, and it's being harvested and trucked by our neighbors. And so this is a really important economic loop and an economic cycle. And it has been alluded to earlier, this is part of a bigger quilt. This is a patch and a bigger quilt of the forest products industry. If you have a sawmill that's taking round logs and making square lumber, they chip those slabs. Those slabs, that chip product needs to go someplace. And biomass, paper mills is one market. As we all know, the paper industry has contracted. Biomass is an important market there. And so for a paper mill, or excuse me, a sawmill producing chips, it is a significant management question they have is, where am I going to send these chip slabs? And to put that in perspective, some of these sawmills produce on the order of 2-3 truckloads of chips a day. So it's not something you can pile up out back and say, well, we'll figure out a solution over the next month or 2 months. This stuff, it keeps coming. And so it is a management issue, and it's part of this bigger economic puzzle. And having a facility like Berlin is critical. I visit sawmills all the time across the state. One of the first questions I'm asked is, what's going on with Berlin? What's the status on their contract? Are they going to be around? And the concern is, the underlying concern is, what the heck am I going to do with 2 or 3 truckloads of wood chips every day if that facility goes down? Again, for the sake of time, I included in your packet economic information on the forest products industry, 12,000 jobs a year, $2.5 billion in economic activity. Yes, timber tax is a part of that equation, and again, that hits every town's coffers, and so that is also a part of this. I would also mention that the trucks that ride across the road delivering the chips, they all pay taxes and registration fees at the local and state level as well. So this economic piece goes down even into the rural, right into the town offices, and particularly in these rural and yes, even urban communities. I guess at this point, for the sake of brevity, I'll conclude my comments and my testimony, other than to say this is really important from the industry, but also it's a forest health, as was touched on earlier, fire, disease, things of that nature. We need a market that can support the work that our foresters and loggers are doing on those grounds. Thank you. I'll be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jason. We have one question.
Oh, I get the one. Well, Jason, thank you as always. Appreciate you coming in. Just want you to quickly touch on what options, I mean, what percentage of the biomass goes through Burgess in the state? I mean, I know there aren't many other options left for these guys. So if we lose that, what are we looking at?
Yeah, so there's only one other operating facility in Bridgewater. So we heard Burgess consumes about 800,000 green tons a year. The other facility in Bridgewater consumes around 200,000 green tons a year. And to kind of put things in even a broader context, when you look statewide at timber tax data, all products, all species, saw logs, firewood, pine logs, and kind of put that on a per tonnage figure, we're looking at a statewide annual harvest of around 3.5 to 4 million tons a year, all products, all species. So to take an 800,000 ton bite out of that equation, it's huge, and it would have a pretty dramatic impact on the economics of this whole supply chain.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you.
And with that, we're going to close the hearing on HB 142 and open the hearing on HB 257. And we'll hear from the prime sponsor, Representative Oz. Making you a busy person today. Busy man. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning once again, colleagues. For the record, Representative Michael Bose, Rockingham District 5, not a rock star, even though the late Speaker Dick Hinch called me that one time.
Yeah.
But he used to call everybody a rock star. So, nevertheless, here this morning to introduce House Bill 257 relative to telephone carrier of last resort obligations. This bill passed as amended by the House Science, Technology, and Energy Committee, passed by a 20-0 vote, and passed the House on the consent calendar. This bill was passed by the House last year, but rejected by you gentlemen here in the Senate. At the time, it was there were concerns about whether or not there was adequate protection for people who would be affected by the elimination of something called carrier of last resort service obligations by telephone carriers. What we did in the House this year is we added substantial protections to guarantee that no person would be left in the cold by the repeal of any obligation by a carrier to provide those last resort services. If you look at the bill itself, starting on line 12 on the first page and running for virtually the rest of the lines of the bill, this is all new amendment language that was created by ST&E that sets up both a procedure for the Department of Energy to begin accepting applications to be relieved of carrier of last resort obligations and how to process those applications, and also setting up a 6-month period after the effective date of an order that grants an incumbent telephone utility relief from its obligation to provide these services, to make sure that during this 6-month transmission period, nobody falls through the cracks. So this year's version of this bill takes care of all the problems and all the objections that were raised last year that somebody might conceivably not have 911 service once this carrier of last resort obligation was relieved. The way this bill is written this year, that can't happen. Nobody's going to be left out in the cold. And I urge you to seriously consider this version of the bill this year. I think it's a good version. A lot of good input from both sides of the ST&E to get this bill to where it is today. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Seeing none, thank you, Representative. Appreciate it. Chairman, and let's see. Amanda Noonan, Department of Energy, neutral. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Amanda Noonan. I'm the Director of the Consumer Services Division at the Department of Energy. The department doesn't have a position on this bill. It's certainly a legislative policy directive to be considered. We do have some concerns. We appreciate the work that the Science, Technology, and Energy, I always forget the E, I'm sorry, committee did.
She's talking about the rock star.
Did to increase the protections here. But the department continues to have some concerns that there may be some residents and businesses that are left without access to essential communication services such as 911, telehealth, telemedicine types of services. The telecommunications industry has been largely deregulated in New Hampshire since 2010, and competition in the industry is meant to provide alternatives and lower costs for consumers. In the context of this bill, the incumbent carriers are those former, what we think of as the telephone companies, right, that always provided service to us. And the FCC created a carrier of last resort obligation in the Telecommunications Act of 1934 and reaffirmed that with the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which was what kind of kicked off all this competition that's evolved in the telecommunications industry, noting that the carrier of last resort obligations provide a safety net for customers when their chosen provider leaves a competitive market or is unable to continue service. The two criteria spelled out in House Bill 257, the first criteria is based on another wireline provider offering service to at least 95% of households, or one or more mobile service providers, wireless providers, that offer service to 97% of the households. That's not 100% of the residents and businesses within a community. And so we do have some concerns about what happens to those folks in the 5% and or 3%. The second criteria focuses on allowing an incumbent utility incumbent provider to request relief from its carrier of last resort obligation when a provider, multiple providers have received municipal, state, federal funding to serve an entire town or community. And if this is a direction that the legislature wants to go in, the department would suggest that that perhaps is a better criteria to ensure that no customer is left without service. Perhaps with a little tweaks to say that the project is underway, there's a firm completion date, because we know how things take time, projects can fall through, et cetera. But again, those are the concerns the department has, the potential pitfalls with this bill, and certainly unintended consequences. And we recognize all the work, as I said, that the House did on this bill to introduce some additional protections. We do still think there's some risk to customers out there, however. I would also note that one of the provisions within the bill as amended by the House requires the department to create a list on its website of providers within the state that would be available to offer service to consumers and businesses. With the deregulation of the telecommunications industry in 2010, many providers are not required to register with the department. Wireless providers have never been required to tell us that they're here and doing business in the state. And providers using VoIP are not required to register with us either. So we would have a very incomplete list of options that would be available to consumers, and we think that's a little bit problematic as well. So with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Senator Altshuler?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. We are undergoing a process right now of using some of our ARPA money to reach out to those areas that have limited broadband and communications services. So if this were to go into effect 60 days after passage, there's a possibility, if I've read this correctly, that between 5 and 3% of rural areas will possibly lose access to emergency services contact. Is that am I extrapolating that out correctly?
Yes, that's the concern with those less than 100% percentages. And I think we all have experience driving around our own communities and across the state where there's gaps in coverage, even within what we think of as larger communities. There are still those pockets where folks are not served.
Follow up? Senator Pearl?
Good morning. Thank you for coming in. So, I mean, primarily, probably the carrier that's covering most of this would be Consolidated, correct? They're the larger wired carrier in the state.
Yes, in terms of the incumbent providers, that's correct.
So what would be the, I guess, the benefit to them of not being required to do this? Because I believe currently they are required to fill this service, correct?
That's correct. As an incumbent telecommunications utility, they do have a carrier of last resort obligation, and that's what they're seeking relief from. I know that they'll testify and tell you what they see as a benefit to this. And as I understand that, and I don't want to speak for them, it relates to overbuilding in very heavily populated municipalities, the city of Manchester perhaps, and having to overbuild in an area where there's multiple providers in order to serve someone that asks for service. But I'll defer to them to tell you what benefits they would see.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Sarah Davis? Welcome.
Good morning, Senator Abart. Oh, sorry. I not push the button. Good morning, Senator Avard and Senator Pearl and other senators on this committee. My name is Sarah Davis, and I'm with Consolidated Communications. Good time since we were just talking about my company. The bill is back for a second time this year, as introduced at the beginning. I think that there was a very good description of the bill and what has taken place since the bill was introduced. Pretty simply stated, Consolidated is required to continue to be a provider of last resort in its entire service territory throughout the state. That mandate used to be funded through universal service contributions at the FCC, and those universal service contributions no longer exist. They have been converted to broadband, to subsidies for broadband, and they are no longer given to the traditional telephone companies that they continue to have the requirements on. So the fundamental concern of Consolidated is that they continue to have an unfunded mandate. And when you have a monopoly situation and you have a requirement, that's one thing. When you open the doors to competition and Consolidated is forced to compete with carriers such as Comcast and Charter, who don't have a similar obligation and get to choose where they serve and where they don't serve, they get to make good investment decisions for their business, it's very difficult for us to compete. So we have sought two ways to get out of allow us to get out of that obligation, and we have done the best we can to ensure that customers are protected, that these are situations where, one, the area is truly competitive, or where, two, the state has made a choice to fund a different provider for 100% of the municipality. If the state has chosen with federal ARPA funds to fund somebody else to be the carrier throughout a municipality, it just seems logical. Why should we have to remain for maybe the one or two people that have a traditional landline that want to keep it and continue to maintain thousands of miles of copper potentially just to serve those few people that are using this traditional service? So that's the first one. The second one isn't 100%, and the reason for that is that there is always a situation where there's somebody who's off the grid, maybe doesn't have power to their house, has made a choice. The woman from the Municipal Association is one of those people, as we were talking, and they've made a choice not to have these communication services, or they're very far out, and so we're trying to come to a place where there's meaningful relief without having to test everyone. In small municipalities, people talk about the rural municipalities. In rural municipalities, the numbers are really small, and so even though it's only 3%, 3% of a very small number is very small. So, this is not an area where relief would be triggered in those municipalities because there isn't great coverage today. This is for the larger municipalities, the Concords, the Manchesters, the Nashuas, where there can be 3, 4, 5, and even 6 providers. And Consolidated, is seeking the opportunity to be able to make decisions on where it serves, not because it has to, but because it makes sense, because there's a benefit to do so. So those are all the reasons for our bill. I wanted to address 2 points. I think I've addressed the point with respect to why Consolidated is seeking this. It's to continue to invest. We are the largest fiber provider in the state of New Hampshire. We have upgraded more fiber connections than anyone in the state of New Hampshire in the last 3 years. So our commitment to the state and our commitment to invest is unquestioned. It's just doing so in a way that continues to make us a healthy and viable company, not a traditional mandate that belongs on a monopoly. And then with respect to the question about could this happen 60 days after passage, I don't think so. There's a pretty substantive process that has to go through. Following that, it involves the DOE, it involves public hearings in the areas where this is happening. And so it is not something that this passes and then all of a sudden we're done serving in an area. There's a pretty extensive process, and that was what was worked in the House amendments to make sure everybody knows. We also have an affirmative obligation to try to get communication service to those people, that 3% or 5% that don't have them. We have an affirmative obligation to try to help get them covered. This has happened in other areas throughout the state. In Dixville, when they were released, there was a concern about a couple of customers, and some work had to be done to make sure those customers continue to be served, and that process went very well, and they continue to have service today. And with that, I will answer any questions you all have.
Questions from the committee? Okay. Senator Pearl.
Good morning. Thanks for coming in.
Good morning. Thank you.
So would you believe that less than 15 minutes from here, there are a section of Loudon, which is the town that I live in, that if you take away the copper line service, we don't have anything else. We're 15 minutes from the Capitol here, and they don't have cell service. There's areas that don't have, and I guess I'm concerned if we allow this to go forward, how are these folks supposed to access emergency services?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious of the area of Loudon, but you're suggesting there's no cable company they can't get, Comcast they can't get, Charter they can't get anyone.
Starlink is the only thing I can get.
Yep, and Starlink certainly allows for a voice connection, as does HughesNet. There are also satellite cellular phone service that can get you a 911 connection. Actually, is very secure. Can be used in the White Mountains, frankly. So there are alternatives, and we would have the affirmative obligation to prove that. If it's a significant portion of Loudon, it probably wouldn't fall into this category, and then wouldn't be subject to relief. I don't know the specifics of Loudon sitting here, but if it were a very small number, then we would have to prove that there were alternatives, and that burden would be on us.
So I guess my concern is it appears we'd be pushing people to a Starlink service, or even if they have to go to a DSL or something like that, they're looking at $80 to $100 a month in fees to maintain some type of access, whereas maintaining a simple copper line is significantly cheaper. And I guess I'm a little concerned about that, and I'd kind of like to understand how that would be beneficial to the consumers to push them in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think I question the numbers a little bit. I mean, a copper line is typically around $50, and most other services I've seen for a voice connection are around $50. Starlink can be more expensive because you're getting a broadband connection with that, right? You're getting more than just a voice connection, and so I can't exactly respond to that. I do appreciate that. Forever, copper phone service is the thing and was the thing, and that's why it was subsidized by the federal government to ensure everybody had service. But at some juncture, you've taken away all the subsidies, you've chosen to subsidize other companies, yet you're still mandating it on one particular group of companies. I don't understand how that makes good policy, and all that's going to do is make a less strong group of telephone companies and give a leg up to the competition. And I don't really think it's the role of the state to make those decisions. If you're going to mandate something, then typically that comes with funding mechanism to do that. I mean, I appreciate the desire, but then nobody wants to fund it on the back end. So, at some point we have to recognize this was a monopoly situation that is now a competitive situation, and that has benefits, and we need to roll that up in a way that's thoughtful. That's why this bill is taking a very small step to be thoughtful in the removal of that obligation slowly.
Last one.
Promise. And I certainly completely respect what you're saying. We have to be careful from a policy standpoint to make sure that we're not leaving a small segment of society without access to these emergency services. So
sure.
I appreciate that, and I'm certainly understanding and trying to understand, and I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Senator Altshuler with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question.
Yeah, of course.
I hear what you're saying in a macro sense,
right.
And understand that there will be some messiness if this were to go through to pull this apart. But I'm right now, it is the obligation to provide those services, and there are people who use landlines, my mother being one of them, who doesn't use the computers.
Right.
So it depends on that landline, and on the second page of the bill and on page 3, I can't help but notice that using that landline to reach out to the customers isn't enumerated. That notice, great, goes out on a billing statement, put it in the newspaper of general circulation, and put it out on websites. Why not call them on that landline that you want to shut down?
Consolidated has no concerns with adding that. I mean,
yeah.
I don't think it came up. I don't think there was an affirmative discussion or not. We certainly have no issue calling people.
Yeah. A follow-up, Mr. Chair? So what's concerning to me is if this were to happen, what the transition is, so that there is not a 95 or 97% coverage, but there's 100% coverage, because the people who are dependent on that are most likely, and in my personal experience, and I can only speak to that right now, not going to see that on a website. Not going to see that. I don't use cell phones. Having them get a Starlink, you might as well tell them they need to go to the moon.
Right.
It's so.
And I think that's where the
So-
billing statement came from, is that the
Yeah.
idea was that they would have a billing statement. Originally, we said newspaper. There were concerns with people that newspapers are outdated. I mean, unfortunately, there's probably no perfect way to get a hold of everybody, but we call our customers all the time. We have no problem calling our customers. That wasn't left out for any reason to trick the customers. We certainly want to make sure they're aware.
That wasn't the implication. It just seemed like an odd thing to be missing. Thank you.
I think we just all missed it. I don't think we talked about it. So
Thank you very much for your testimony. No further questions.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Catherine Heck from New Hampshire Municipal Association.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Catherine Heck for the record, and I represent the New Hampshire Municipal Association. And we are here to oppose the bill. However, we did want to recognize that the bill that had come before you last year and the modified version in the original form that went to the House this year, we had significant concerns with as written. I do want to acknowledge that Chairman Vose and his committee, along with their subcommittee, spent countless hours working with both sides to at least get the bill amended to this point that is significantly improved upon where it was. However, we share the same concerns as the Department of Energy about those 3 to 5% of residents without 911 service. Our residents pay taxes, and that includes 911 services. So 3 to 5 residents for every 100 could be a significant number of people who could be left without access to 911, to your point, Senator Altschuler, about who may or may not want to transition away from copper. We do recognize that technology is coming, and we are building out broadband all the time. The state has partnered and used their funds to make sure underserved and unserved areas of our state are receiving broadband funding so that they can build out. However, there's still some areas in the state, and you just passed Senate Bill 222 on revenue bonds for those 16 towns that couldn't get somebody to come in under a public-private partnership. They're forming a communications district, for example, so they would fall into the category of lines on page 2, lines 3 through 5. No, I'm sorry, I apologize, lines 6 through 9. So because they would not be receiving necessarily any federal funds to fully build out their community, they're going to, I assume, hopefully do that, but do the very best they can. So that's 16 communities for one, that's an example. We do want to say that we had asked that on line 9 and 10, that at the end, the or become an and that would, but we don't know if that's reasonable or practical based on some other testimony that we heard. But we would say that now there is a process in place, so at least municipalities, governing bodies, and residents would be aware that this change might be coming to their community and have a greater understanding that this could be occurring versus the way it had been previously written, that the DOE would just come up with some process, which I'm sure would be very well done. But this really does put in statute, should this bill pass, the process for which this has to occur. We did also want to touch on, while state and federal funds are coming in to communities, to municipalities, they are also available to providers. So we are continuing to see that build out occur. The state is developing a map, and we are moving forward very quickly in that direction. And we are awaiting that map's release from BEA that would kind of overlay all of the different providers in the state and kind of have a one-stop place to look at where that service is, to Senator Pearl's question about there's gaps, right, certainly for self-service. And our last concern for residents was affordability and access. We do know that satellite coverage can be from $100 to $180 depending on where you live, and that's certainly a giant difference from a landline, which we just heard is around $50. So that is another consideration, in addition to having someone be required to change. The cost associated with that change was a concern. I know anecdotally, for our school district in my community spent $300,000 on hotspots during the pandemic for the people that were unserved to make sure that children could learn. So that's just an example of the cost associated with these additional types of telecommunications. We do not want to see the digital divide increase in New Hampshire. We want to continue to see it decrease, and we are well on our way to decreasing it. BA East has some great statistics on how many miles of broadband they're hanging a day and how many communities are continuing to serve. So we do feel that this bill at some point in the future could definitely be realized. We're just not sure if now is the time. So I'll take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
My last speaker is Teresa Rosenberg. Sorry, we're already back onto our deadline because we get kicked out at 12 o'clock, so.
Am I
still
on?
got 2 more bills.
Am I on?
You're
Yeah,
my last
I'm on.
speaker.
I'll be fast. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Teresa Rosenberger. I work for Bernstein Shore, and I'm here representing the New Hampshire Telephone Association. That is comprised of all the old monopoly Ma Bell's companies. Granite State Telephone, Dunbarton Telephone, Bretton Woods Telephone, the TDS companies, and Consolidated Communications. And the New Hampshire Telephone Association is totally in support of this bill and thinks it is terrific enabling legislation. It is not a mandate, it is enabling. That's all it is. I want to thank Chairman Vose and the Science and Technology Committee. They did a terrific job. They came out with a bipartisan amendment that we think is terrific. Chris Munns, who's a new member of that committee, worked very hard with Troy Murner, and they did a great job on this amendment and passed it unanimously, and the House passed it unanimously. Last year, you all put it in interim study, and I will tell you it was because of a time constraint because somebody needed to be in the hearing room. But anyway, so the carry of last resort started in 1934, and they divided the state up into monopolies. At that point, you had to serve everybody in your monopoly. And it was your duty to serve all of the territory. In 1996, we had the Telecommunications Act, and that was promoting competition. That act has worked. It has been incredibly successful. The feds somehow or another really did do it, so they're promoting competition. Now we have all over the state. We have cable, we have VoIP, we have municipalities, electric cooperatives, wireless government entities providing telecommunications services. In 2012, we started the path on deregulation of the Ma Bell companies, and we passed Senate Bill 48, which began that, and began the competitive landscape. What I'd really like to quickly say is this is just continuing what we have done successfully, which is enabling the companies to compete, enabling them to be able to frankly deploy services where it is needed to these pockets that aren't going to be covered by the ARPA funds or aren't covered now. I mean, if you are using your resources wisely, you can cover the state. So in this case, I don't think any of my clients would petition the Department of Energy and the PUC for relief of carry of last resort if they weren't sure they could prove the conditions. And even though it's not 100%, it's pretty much you wouldn't go in there unless you were absolutely sure you had multiple carriers on the wireless side that had 95% coverage and on the landline side that had multiple carriers that had 95% coverage. It's costly to do it, so you wouldn't bother if you weren't sure that you really could prove the case. Where are the targets? Manchester, Nashua, maybe Concord, maybe Portsmouth. It's where there's competition. There are some parts of the state that have received funding from the feds, ARPA funding, to build out 100% of a town. Now, yes, would you target those towns? Because guess what? They've been built out 100%. They've been built out with federal money, no taxes, no capital, no nothing. So you're going to take your resources and say, okay, I'm going to go to Loudon, where there's this pocket that they don't have anything, and I'm going to deploy fiber there. I'm not going to, why should I keep supporting copper in a town that's got 100% competition or 100% federal money for competition? The way this bill is written, this cannot be effective until those communities that have ARPA money are actually built out. So you couldn't apply for Plymouth today, which is going to be built out 100% because it hadn't happened. So you got to wait till it's happened.
I'm going to have to start cutting
Okay,
short.
I'm done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and with that, I'm going to close the hearing because
All
I
right.
have two other bills that I have to hear.
If you have questions, you know how to get me.
Yes, you can ask you offline. Thank you very much. And I'm going to open up the hearing, HB 385, and recognize Representative O's. You have the floor, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be very brief and quick here. House Bill 385 was requested by the Public Utilities Commission. By the way, for the record, Representative Michael Vose, Rockingham, District 5.
The rock's there.
So this was requested by the Public Utilities Commission. As you all will recall, when we broke up the old Public Utilities Commission into a new commission and a Department of Energy, both bodies were required to revise their rules. In the process of doing that, the new PUC discovered that it would be advantageous to create a process for handling complaints with regard to the new community power aggregation programs that will be starting up as a result of modifications made to RSA 53-E. So they requested that the department, which has now an enforcement division, take on complaint resolution for community aggregation. And that is what this bill does. It sets up within the Department of Energy the process for resolving complaints filed against community power aggregation organizations. We modified the bill in committee. We amended it to add 3 things. At the bottom of the first page on lines 28 through 30, we added lines to allow that if a complaint by the department wasn't resolved to the satisfaction of the complainee, that they could petition the commission for an adjudicative proceeding. The second change we made is on page 2, lines 3 and 4, in which we required that the department shall make public any received complaints that it gets. And on line 6, we added the language that says that this process shall apply to complaints filed with the DOE on or after the effective date of the act. So any complaints that are filed prior to that would be handled by the Public Utilities Commission. So that's the essence of the bill. It just sets up a procedure for the department to use to deal with these complaints, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Representative. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Well done. Amanda, you're our final speaker.
I promise to be brief. So with the advent of community power aggregation, the commission and the department are both, I think, grappling. I don't want to speak for the commission, but our view is both agencies are grappling with the additional workload that this is putting on our agencies. And whether the responsibility for resolving complaints pertaining to actions undertaken or omitted by municipal county aggregator or an electric distribution utility falls with the commission or with the department, from the department's perspective anyway, additional staffing resources would be necessary. We simply don't have the resources within the department to handle the increased workload that would result from these potential complaints. We would anticipate 1 to 2 additional full-time equivalents to deal with that workload. And the second part is community power aggregations are not entities which the department could assess. We have the ability to assess utilities for the work we do to regulate utilities. We have no ability to assess community power aggregations or municipalities. So we have no funding source for these new positions we would potentially need to address the increased workload that would come along with this. It would also be difficult, I think, for the department to reach a satisfactory resolution or to require a satisfactory resolution from a community power aggregation program or a municipality, or to compel a response from them, as, again, we have no authority over those entities. We have authority over utilities, and so any complaint involving a utility would be within our purview, but certainly not for a municipality or a community power aggregation program, which would be a municipal or county governmental program. I would also note just a technical correction on page 2, lines 3 through 4. It says for non-residential ratepayers, the department would docket and make public any received complaint. Any complaint, whether it's from a residential or non-residential customer that's a formal complaint, would be docketed and would be public. It wouldn't just be limited to residential ratepayers. I mean, non-residential ratepayers, sorry. And with that.
Questions from the committee? Well done. Thank you very much. And with that, we're going to close the hearing, and we're going to open up reopen 442. That was 385.
Yeah, 385.
Is there a sign-up sheet?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we have a full hour, so that's about the time we have, and which means
Number in order,
1, 2, 3. Okay. Yeah. All right. Have all these been Nick? Are all these speakers that are new speakers? But there's not been a cross-reference. No, they've been outside. All right. Well, there's 5 on this one. Yep. All right, I have 5 speakers on this page. So let's start with Jason Hopkins. I'm going to give you 3 minutes at max. You didn't speak last time, did you?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, that's what we gave everybody last time.
Okay. I'm gonna say something first. These zones that they wanna fish in,
This is part of your 3 minutes.
these zones we wanna fish in, we've been fishing there for 45 years. I'm 74 years old, I have short lines. I shouldn't have to change my lines all over in 45 years to accommodate these divers. Now, I'm not the only one in that zone they wanna fish in, there's a lot of us. And we have 10 traps in there. Out of 10 traps in the summer, most of your lobsters move out like the lobstermen say, it's warm. We probably catch 40 shorts in 10 traps, not including the other ones, all right? All of those, we have to gauge them, because they might be just a little bit short. You think these divers are gonna gauge all those? I doubt it. They're gonna put them in their bags and they're gonna scurry home. That's not fair to us. We fish in 10 to 30 feet of water. And the current coming out of Piscataquis, if you put out in that current with 3 bricks from a single potter, it's gonna suck them under and you're gonna lose them. So that's the way it is. You read the testimony. Thank you for your time, sir.
All right.
And
We are
that's
both,
part of your 3 minutes.
yep, we are both totally against this bill. I am not the only that fishes there. I am a small-time lobsterman, and a lot of friends do the same area. The Coast Guard area and covers the right to go up Wentworth, call the Coast Guard, then we call them First Cove, Second Cove, Third Cove. I have small short lines, and if it takes Coast Guard away from us, which that's a zone that they want to try to go in, that means that we have to put longer lines and go out deeper and interfere with the commercial guys that's their livelihood. I respect the big commercial lobstermen. My son and I work out of an 18-foot boat with a 60-horse motor tiller. I have a helper's license. He does all the books and reporting as well as run the motor. I only pull. See where we are going to pull our traps I saw a diver's flag was around my traps, and you're not supposed to be within 50 feet of a diver's flag, so we waited outside the cove. When he moved away, we went in and pulled our pots. We found 3 traps that were in a line, and every time they went to one of my traps, all my buoys were moving around because they were swimming around my pots. My covers were lifted, and my zip ties were cut. The second time, and then when we went in and we pulled those traps, every cover was left open, and there was not one lobster in those traps. So I know what is going on with you're around diving around my traps, and then I go down and go in right after that when they move away, and my lobsters are gone. It's pretty suspicious that a diver went down and cut my trap, cut my ties, and stole my lobsters. And then, where is he? And then we had 6 new traps that we put into a second cove, which they dive in. They didn't break my zip ties, but they bent my covers. And I had to sit there almost 45 minutes to start repairing traps because they can't leave our equipment alone because they got to go down and dive. And I think it's going to be a disgrace to let this bill pass.
Time's up. So I'm going to ask you one question. Should we just make it illegal for divers to go down?
Huh?
Should we make it illegal for divers to dive in our waters?
I mean, it's got a $35 5-pot license. Mm-hmm. Lobster fishing is putting a lobster trap down and trapping them. It is not a diver to dive down and get them.
Right.
You pay for a license. You can go and buy a $35 license for 5 traps and put traps in. If they get all the money to go buy all their divers equipment, then they have money to go buy traps and put traps in.
I have dove, sir, and I've seen lobsters on the bottom. You want to see how fast they swim? You ain't going to catch them. And they're not going to catch them either unless they got a big net, because they swim fast. And when you pick them up underwater, their tails are flapping all the time. You're going to check for V-notches? I doubt it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Marshall Murray. Oh, you're not, no, I'm sorry. I got you not listed as speaking. I apologize. Let's see here. Opposed. Chris Adamitis. Chris Adamitis? All right, is Susan Price in the room? I'll have you speak. Okay, Chris is here, and then we'll have.
This is
hey,
my
Chris,
seat, correct?
That is your seat.
Good morning.
You got
How
3
are
minutes,
you?
my friend.
My name's Chris Adamitis. I'm a commercial lobster fisherman now for New Hampshire, going on 24 years. Just have a little statement here. Lobster fishing industry faces many challenges. In spite of these challenges, the lobster industry preserves and keeping the valuable resource healthy through the measures we take in the name of sustainability. We all collectively, we strive to increase the egg production and the brood stock. The egg-bearing females, the V-notched, are to assure that the females continue to breed for the future resource production. The issue with the bill is it gives the divers in a pass for the requirement for the V-notch. Most importantly, the trap industry supplies the lobster resource with its main food source paid for by the lobstermen. I know all of us collectively ourselves from a farming standpoint. Us as lobstermen, we do lose lobster traps. In New Hampshire, the majority of traps lost do get recovered by fishermen through grappling techniques. We lose them. A lot of us have different chart plotting scenarios and different ways to get them back, but generally, me personally, I'm going on 14, 15 years without losing a single trap or without retrieving a trap that's gone missing. Some of the traps may get lost. This should not become a rationale for allowing the taking of lobsters by the scuba diving activity. Unless the divers are feeding the lobsters, as in the case with the trap industry, then taking of the lobsters by the divers does not in any way contribute to the sustainability of the lobster food source and the resource itself. Taking of the lobsters by diving can and will most likely destroy the lobsters and the habitat. Then there's the issue where the divers grab the lobsters, as you guys know. They also use the tickle stick, I believe is what it's called. They're not going to be able to tell if the lobster is a male or female prior to grabbing onto it, short size, legal sized, whether it's shedding its shell or the female is extruding eggs if she were to be an egg-bearing female. Lobsters, while in their molting or egg extruding state, can die when being handled by divers. Egg-bearing lobsters can abort their eggs when being stressed out from a violent attack or being chased down. Taking of the lobsters by diving is not a kind or gentle way to harvest the lobsters. It doesn't contribute to the lobster sustainability, and I just don't believe this activity should be allowed. That's all I've got.
Thank you for your testimony.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Susan Price? Oh, you won't be testifying, okay. So, all right. Mike Flanagan? All right, Mike Flanagan, yeah. Welcome, Mr. Flanagan. You didn't testify last week, right?
No, I did not. That was my brother.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I won't be too long-winded. My name is Michael Flanagan. I'm 81 years old. I've been fishing commercially since I was 13 years old. They tell me I'm the oldest one left in New Hampshire still lobster fishing. My brother and I both hold 1,200 trap licenses. My two sons own a piece of waterfront property in Kittery. They're in the wholesale lobster business, buying and selling air freight lobsters. My family is up to our ears in the lobster fishery. I don't want to tie you up. I'm opposed to this bill. It's against the law. The laws have been here for a very long time. There's no it's the improper way to harvest lobsters. They should not be disturbed in the natural environment. It's totally wrong. As a kid, I used to go skin diving and snorkeling and looking at them. I don't want to tie this up forever, but the idea of divers touching the lobsters is totally wrong. It'd be the same thing as you people go trout fishing. The guy comes along and stick a dynamite in your trout pond. You know what'll happen. Right now, the price of lobsters is higher than it's been for the last 9 to 10 months. If I could throw a stick of dynamite in the ocean and blow the lobsters up, I'd go pick them up too, but it's not just an improper way to harvest lobsters. This thing of ghost traps, one thing or another, I would like to state publicly, if these divers know of some place where there's a gob or a bunch of lost gear, I'd like them to notify the association, notify the Fish and Game Department. We fishermen will go out there with them, retrieve the gear that's lost there. Just last Saturday, all the responsible people in New Hampshire picked up all the gear around the shore that had washed up over the winter. I said responsible fishermen. The stuff that washes up, we call it dub gear, part-time people, this guy, that guy. They just leave it, it washes up. Right now, without exaggeration, a new lobster trap in that fishery with the buoy and rope is $200 a piece. It's astronomical what these traps cost. The year before, last, I never lost a trap. No, 2 years ago, I lost 10 traps. They were towed off by a barge. I tried for 3 or 4 days to get them. This past year, I didn't lose a single trap. I have a 1,200 trap license. I normally fish 900 traps. A couple times the buoys will get cut off. We know in this thing about marking your traps. Every single day, I write down the Loran bearings where my traps are. How do you think we find them in the fog? We know exactly where they are. I can find my traps within 3 feet. I fished offshore, 165 miles. I went back and grappled the gear up exactly where it was. The navigation equipment we have today is dead on. We don't go fishing and lose lobster traps. If my traps disappear, someone stole them or they got hooked up by a barge and got towed away. And I can go on forever. The well-known Willie stories. There's a lot of respect now. The fishermen, a different type of people are fishing now. And we've all got so much money invested in this fishery. There's a lot of respect for each other. We don't cut up each other's gear. If you happen to set across somebody, they'll cut your ground line and retie it. Nobody cuts your gear and drops it anymore. Nobody cuts your traps off anymore because we all bleed red. And there's a lot of respect for each other in the fishery.
I thank you very much for your testimony.
Any other questions?
We're gonna hear testimony mostly today.
Excuse me?
We're gonna hear testimony today.
Yeah. But
thank you very much. I'm just gonna hear testimony today.
For clarification, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
are you saying that the committee is not allowed to ask questions?
Correct. For right now.
You're denying any questions from senators?
I'm trying to get everybody a chance to speak.
Well, I hear what you're saying, but I'm
Right.
just clarifying.
And I have to get out of here by
Committee,
12 o'clock.
well,
I made it clear. All right, so I'm trying to give everybody a chance to speak.
We should have time so everybody can speak.
I have a lot of papers, and they're gonna kick us out of the room.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. You're right. No, we don't.
Everybody should have a time to talk and have questions asked. That is wrong.
Yeah. All right, so. Ray Carter? No, you don't want to speak. Okay, I'm trying to give everybody who opposes the right to speak first. All right. All right. Is Greg Hill here?
Never thought I'd get here.
All right. Representative, we have 3 minutes. We're trying to give everybody 3 minutes to speak.
Can't do anything in 3 minutes. Thank you. Good morning. I am Representative Greg Hill, representing Merrimack 2, which is the town of Northfield. Here once again to hopefully indicate some of the newer items that we have in this amendment. This was an amendment that was created after the House spoke in committee or voted in committee and prior to it going to the floor. I think it cleans up most of the problems, if not all of the problems that Fish and Game pointed out. It was not easy to get this all completed in time, as I'm sure you're aware. But what we're doing is it basically has two parts. It is the divers having the ability to be in the water. And from my perspective, the key thing that most people should be looking at is the fact that the divers would then be able to release the animals that are currently starving to death in these traps that we can argue over how many there are. All of the estimates that we're seeing are 10% of lobstermen are losing their traps, or of the lobstermen that lose traps, they lose roughly 10% per year. And that comes from a number of sources, including the federal government. That works out to about 11,000 a year that are lost in New Hampshire waters from just New Hampshire lobstermen. The people that are picking these up in Maine are saying 60% of the traps that they bring up from the surface, from the bottom of the ocean to the surface, have live animals in them, 60%. So we're talking a large number just in New Hampshire alone that are starving to death. And these are reoccurring items because as a lobster or a fish dies inside one of these traps, it means that it becomes bait and attracts the next group of lobsters or fish to go into that trap. So it's an ongoing basis. The estimates that I've seen from the federal government are 15 million traps on the Gulf of Maine area. The gentleman that was here from Oceanswide came and talked about 3 million traps off the coast of Maine. I don't care how many traps there are. It's no difficulty, and I'm sure you heard from divers who said that they have no difficulty locating these traps. They are out there. One of the divers went out and in a 30-minute dive took all of these pictures of traps. So it's not hard to do. The people in Maine in one weekend pulled out 75 traps that are available to be returned.
I'm going to ask you to leave.
Good. That's BS. Yep.
3 minutes. He's the prime sponsor of this bill, by the way. I'm gonna have to give you 30 seconds to wrap it up.
So these are traps that are available to come back to the divers. They have their names on them. To me, that's one of the contradictions. This should save lobstermen money. These are traps that don't have to have anything done to them other than maybe pressure washed, but they don't have to buy replacements for them. And I can't understand why that isn't something that is of interest to our lobstermen.
Representative, thank you very much.
You
And I
bet.
did let you go over, but I did let a couple other people go over as well, so thank you. And
I appreciate it. That can be shown. Thank you very much. Any questions, I'm certainly available.
yeah, we can check offline. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Rep Ellen Reed. For the record, I did let the previous gentleman opposed go over as well. Representative, we have a little 3-minute time limit. If we could keep it.
I'll be as brief as I can,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair. Thank you for the record. My name is Ellen Reed, and I represent Rockinghampton. That's Newmarket and Newfields. I sit on the House Fish and Game Committee. I did extensive work on this bill with members from the other side of the party to include a lot of the conservation elements that are in this. I'm having passed out right now a bunch of information, a lot of it having to do with the measures that other states, including Maine, are undertaking in conjunction with the lobster industry of those states to do the cleanup. Something, and you will see on all of these, that New Hampshire doesn't do anything like this. The last page I want to bring to your attention, it is a letter from the Humane Society and the New Hampshire Wildlife Coalition in support of this bill as amended. So the ghost trap problem, I'm sure I'm at a disadvantage because I couldn't hear everything that's been said and I don't want to repeat things. The point is that we are allowing an industry to profit off of leaving their trash that not only litters the ocean, but kills indiscriminately different species. And we aren't doing anything about it. So some of the things that I had worked on to get into the bill, like enabling the department to charge a fee for returning those traps, that's something that Florida does. As far as the scuba diving piece, every other state except for Maine that has coastal waters allows scuba diving for lobster because it is more sustainable than dragging pots and dragging grappling hooks along the bottom. In fact, Australia, who protects their coral reefs jealously, do not allow any pots or traps. You have to dive for lobster in Australia. So I don't want to repeat anything anybody else said. I do want to just mention the last question that I had in committee of someone from the lobster industry. He testified, and I don't remember who it was, but he testified to the fact that the V-Notch program was very successful for increasing numbers of lobster and how they were initially very against that program. And I clarified, so you're saying that the industry is typically very against change, but then once change is implemented, it actually helps the industry. And he said, yes, we are very, very, very reticent to change. And so I think most of the testimony you've heard from the industry is basically that, a fear of change, because this doesn't hurt lobstermen, it doesn't hurt the lobster industry. And in fact, it helps our oceans and it helps people to enjoy our oceans, and it helps the indiscriminately killed species that are being hurt currently, not just the egg layer lobsters, but also the potentially species of concern that are being caught in these traps that the biodegradable hatch doesn't, the rusting hatch doesn't actually open because it's blocked or because it's held in place by barnacles or whatever. So I think I'm around 3 minutes at this point. So
right on time.
So I'll wrap up and open to questions, but I'm sure you guys are in the shuffling process.
We're just going to hear testimony right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Louis Figueria again. Figueria.
Got some pictures here I'm going to leave of the...
Did I pronounce your last name right?
Oh, I'm sorry. Figueroa.
Figueroa.
Yep. Visual aids. Mr. Chair, a member of the committee, my name is Louis Figueroa. I'm a resident of Merrimack, New Hampshire, and in support of House Bill 442 with its proposed amendments. I'm one of the law-abiding citizens and divers called up at Colonel Jordan in the past hearing, and I also have a mass lobster license, so I'm familiar with what it's for diving for lobsters off the coast of New Hampshire, off the coast of Massachusetts. Why I'm pushing this as a New Hampshire taxpayer, I feel that lobsters are a resource that should be enjoyed for all, not to the limited few. Just like we can access crab and scallops today. As a resident, I know that we can obviously take lobsters through a 5-pot non-commercial license, but as you know, that requires a boat, which is not cheap. And unless you live on the seacoast, it's just not practical to bait and check your pots. And as you'd also heard from the other supporters of this bill, that the taking by lobsters by hand is much better than taking of lobsters if I had a 5-pot non-commercial license, and the amount of lobsters taken through diving is significantly less with recreational scuba than it is by 5-trop non-commercial licenses. I truly understand the challenges of the commercial lobsterman. I know it's a tough way to make a living with fuel costs and increased regulation and cost of bait, and that the concern that this could be, the regulations like this could regulations that exist could hamper their livelihood. But I also understand of the contribution of the commercial fishery, commercial lobster to the fishery of the local New Hampshire economy. If we really believe that this would be a burden to the commercial lobster, we would not be pushing this bill. In this bill, we purposely limited the season, the catch, the number of permits, and through diving that would be negligible to the resource. Another requirement of the bill is that we will show all the landings by diving available to demonstrate that diving for lobsters does not threaten the livelihood of commercial lobstermen or revenue to the resource. We've also made efforts to sit down with the opponents of this bill to understand the concerns and come up with a workaround. Attempts have been made to reach out to Chief of Marine Fisheries, but never got a response. We did have the opportunity to sit down with Eric Anderson, President of New Hampshire Commercial Fishermen's Association, and Colonel Jordan, both of which I have a tremendous amount of respect for in what they do, and they've been very helpful to explain the concerns. I've also attended meetings with the advisor committee for the marine fisheries and the New Hampshire Fish and Game Legislative Committee. What I'm asking for is just a compromise in terms of the length of season. We've made compromises in terms of the length of season, number of licenses, number of lobsters, yet the opposition refuses to come and sit down with us. Last week, we heard from Oceanswide on the success of the program, that they've collaborated with commercial fishermen. And what was key to the success of that pilot program was having divers and lobstermen working together. And that's what I'm asking to do in the state. Those pictures that you sent, everyone's saying that we don't have a problem with abandoned derelict gear. Those are from dives that I did. Three of those pictures were from dives that I did just last night. And I have the names of even some of the fishermen that are leaving those pots.
I have to ask
Yeah.
you, we've got your 3 minutes.
Okay.
We've got this.
So all I'm saying is I just want to be able to offer my assistance to lobster if they need help with locating pots, retrieving pots, unfouling, as I have a tremendous amount of respect for what you do. Thank you.
So if you have further comments, you're welcome to send them to the committee through email. And that goes for anybody. If you get beyond your 3 minutes, you're certainly welcome to send the committee an email.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Sean Dubois? Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak for a minute on this.
We'll actually give you 3.
All right, sounds great. Yeah, my name is Sean Dubois. I'm from Pelham, New Hampshire. I've been scuba diving since 2001, and I enjoy the resources of New Hampshire, hunting, fishing, scuba diving, and I'm here to hopefully support, taking a few lobsters through scuba diving. I've been, like I said, diving for a long time, and I've been trying to work on this for over 20 years. I think it's time for us to possibly just give this a try. We're asking for a short 2-month season, 3 lobsters per person. It would be realistically, if I could get out, 8 weekends and got the maximum of 3, I would be able to take like 24 lobsters. It's not much. It's negligible to the amount of, it's not going to hurt the fishing industry. And I get it. We definitely support the commercial fishermen, the local fishermen. I have a boat. It's just not practical for me to go from Pelham, New Hampshire to Rye, throw my traps out, and then go home and then come back because I don't have a boat on the water. So I just think it would be nice to just finally be able to do this. Every other state does it. I think that as far as the fishing game goes, they're not going to need to suit up and follow divers. They can do what they do in every other state. I respect the fishing game very much, and they can just check catches when they come out of the water. I'd say probably 50% of the time I come out of the water, Rye Harbor, offshore fishing, I get checked for licenses and catch size, and that's important. We need to do that, So I'm a citizen and a taxpayer, and I just hope that we can give this a chance. Like Lewis had said, we're asking for so little that we're just hoping that this time that we can finally get this passed, and I think everything will go great. And I think you'll see that, and most importantly is the cleanup. I've seen fish stuck in traps. That's what they are. They're traps. They're designed to trap things, and there's a lot of them out there. So we want to get involved too with, cleaning up the environment. If I was diving for lobsters and I had a catch bag, I'm picking up cans, bottles, trash. So we love the marine environment, the ocean. It's just a great place, and I also think it's less invasive to pick up a lobster off of the ground, and if it's a V-notch or egg bearing, you just put it back where it was, not throw it overboard. If I was to have my traps, throw it overboard, have it be prey until it gets back to the bottom and finds a safe place. So it's really invasive. And one of the myth I wanted to dispel was that I had heard somebody say that we're going to go down there, we're going to disturb and destroy and dig up, lobster burrows, and I don't think that's the case at all. The lobsters, they call them bugs, they're cockroaches in the sea, they're everywhere. And I was just hoping that my family and I could grab a few, bring them home for dinner if we're allowed to. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you.
Robert Manning. Good morning, sir. You're aware of the 3 minutes?
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I've been diving for many years, over 40 years. First of all, I want to say I have the utmost respect for lobstermen and anybody that makes their living from the sea. In my years diving, I was trained, and every diver that's out, mostly virtually every diver that's out there is trained, certified, and they're always impressed upon to respect the commercial fishermen and do not raid the lobster traps and so on. And most divers today, they're really out there to do underwater photography. They're there for wreck diving, just plain sightseeing. And lobstering is actually, as you all know, lobsters are nocturnal creatures, and they're not really out there. I mean, you can see them during the day, but they're mostly hiding in their holes and whatnot. But most of the divers I've had experience with haven't gone out there just to go lobstering. They're there for other things. You know, and when they're out there doing wreck diving or photography or whatnot or sightseeing, they may see a lobster there, and even they're being tough to catch because they're usually in their holes and whatnot. But and also the diving community. I've been diving in every state in New England, and most of the other states, I've hardly even been to New Hampshire because the other states seem to offer a lot more. But I just, like I say, I just don't see a problem with the divers, you know, going around poaching traps unless there's a team of people out there that's just raiding traps. But like I say, I have utmost respect for all the fishermen, and I think as a whole, the diving community is very respectful of the trades and the lobstermen and what they're doing.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate you staying under the 3 minutes. Michael, Iglodi? Iglodi, all right, I got pretty close.
Before I start, I'd just like to mention that, you know, last week you let the lobstermen go very long, way beyond their 3 minutes, but I'm going to do my best to keep it right around there. And so I'm from Hooksett, New Hampshire. I own a floor covering showroom, and I'm here to support the Bill 442. If you were to ask even experienced divers here in New Hampshire, many might quickly tell you, compared to a lot of the warmer climates, diving in New Hampshire kind of sucks. Our coastal waters are very cold, the visibility is mostly awful, the dangers we encounter are numerous and most times unexpected. Quite honestly, it can be a very scary experience at times, even for the most experienced divers. Waves, currents, depths, visibility, equipment, companions, markers, ropes, watercraft overhead. All of these things need to be at the front of our minds, and only then can we consider a task, whether it be wreck diving, recovery, repair, photography, scalloping, spearfishing, the list goes on. I began diving in 2004. I found it to be more than exhilarating. The fish, the rocks, the caves, the silence. The diving experience delivers a connection to an appreciation of our environment that I can only describe as spiritual, almost euphoric. I love this sport, and I will never get tired of seeing more. I grew up loving the outdoors, hunting, fishing, fiddleheads, blueberries, anything to do with getting closer to nature with my mom and dad. It blows my mind that it's against the law to free and trap creatures from certain death in abandoned ghost traps, or it's against the law to touch, mark, or even retrieve lost ghost fishing gear. For the lobstermen that I personally have always envied these guys. The videos and the pictures and firsthand testimony overwhelmingly demonstrate only a small fraction of the carnage which has been out of sight and out of mind for decades. What hardworking, tax-paying sportsman or woman wouldn't want to help their fellows recover the tools and tackle of their trade while cleaning up the natural environment at the same time? I also want to point out a huge lie that was told to everybody here last week by the last person to testify. Mr. McIntyre said he couldn't approach within 500 feet of a dive flag. It's 150 feet. The guy that was all angry here before was saying it was 50 feet. These guys don't even know what the distances are. You know, the opposition can only be based on unwarranted paranoia. We want to help. We aren't looking for a good Samaritan pat on the back. We love diving. We love the ocean. But seeing the amounts of entangled traps is beyond disturbing. They're everywhere. These traps can and will be perpetually killing lobsters and other bycatch, not to mention the amount of plastic rope and all the other stuff that's fouling the environment. If the owner of the gear can't retrieve it, then in turn, they are financially hurt. The environmental damage continues to compound. Divers don't need traps to harvest by hand. We won't be dragging stuff across the bottom. We won't be bringing smalls or egg-bearing lobsters to the surface and exposing them as an easy target to other predators on their way down. Divers can save lives of unintended bycatch. Divers can mark gear. Divers can improve the habitat. Divers can and we want to work with fishermen. We have way too much time, money, and training and respect for the environment we love and want to conserve. We don't want to steal your lobsters. Help us help you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll ask everybody to please try not to make disparaging comments of other folks. I know mistakes made, and there's a lot of passion here and emotion, and I respect that. So let's just try and keep our comments positive and not be disparaging of other people that have testified. You're all here because you love and are concerned about the issue. So Weldon Bosworth.
Enough for one for everybody. Members of the committee, thank you. I'm Weldon Bosworth from Guilford, New Hampshire. A little bit about my background. I'm a marine biologist. I have a doctorate in marine biology. I spent 45 years evaluating the impact of man's activities on the environment, including animals. I also led, back in the 70s, 80s, one of the largest scientific diving organizations in the country. We had 15 to 20 divers, which collectively put in over 20,000 hours, most of it right off the coast of New Hampshire. We worked down in Hampton Harbor, Dover on Seabrook. We did a day, night, winter, and summer. I have basically addressed a lot of these issues in my testimony, which you can read. I'd just like to emphasize a couple of things. One, New Hampshire's fortunate in having a lot of public resources, water, coastal water, rivers, and lakes. Also, a lot of public trust resources, animals that they use to harvest. These are all multiple use types of resources. So when you talk about what happens off the shore, we dive for, I used to, I'm too old now, but we can dive for crabs, we can dive for urchins, we can dive for scallops, we can dive for fish, and we don't have to buy a boat to do that. We can just go out and do it. The suggestion that, hey, you guys could get lobsters if you only bought a boat and did it. Well, the order of magnitude between buying a boat and the equipment to trap is at least 100 times more. The cost of the boat is just a minor part. That's probably 20 to 30,000 if you want a safe boat. But I don't understand the idea of them, people saying that's what we should do, because at the resident trapping license, we'd actually trap a lot more lobsters and put much more potential impact to the livelihood of lobstermen. A couple of things I want to stress. I've heard the word sustainability a number of times in about the last four hearings. I don't think anybody understands what that is. Sustainability basically is the idea of being able to do something continuously with no impact on the environment. There is a method of evaluating it. It's called life cycle analysis. I've used it a lot in my consulting career. It considers all elements in a holistic fashion. The idea that lobstering is sustainable when you're using bait fish, forage fish throughout the Gulf of Maine that is depleted, and the lobster industry is a big source of that, that is not sustainability. Up till recently, 70% of the herring catch was used for lobster bait. Now they're depleted so much they're going to other things, menhaden, alewives, mackerel, and they got a new one now because they can't even find it around here, is the black-bellied rosefish. Some of it's imported from Uruguay. The last thing, how much time do I have?
You're done.
Can I say one more thing?
Quickly, 5 seconds.
Okay. Aquaculture. This is not aquaculture. They've habituated some lobsters to feed on their traps, but if that was all taken away, the lobster would be just fine because all the predatory fish that depended on them are gone. So the lobster population is great.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your testimony. Wayne Russell.
Good morning. Hi, good morning. My name is Wayne Russell. I started diving in 1974. I'm a founder of the United Divers in New Hampshire, which has been an active dive club forever, since then, still active today. I became a dive master. I've been here in this room supporting the lobster bill 4 times. This is the 4th time, in the late 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and now. And I was really kind of fascinated with the idea of blowing up lobster by catching them with blowing up dynamite. I've never seen anything like that. I've been a responsible diver. I've stopped counting over 1,000 dives, so I'm active. I'm 70 years old, so I'm not the oldest person in the room. The 81-year-old lobsterman has beat me. In my entire diving career in New Hampshire and anywhere I've been, I've never taken lobster, never. I respected the law. I've been a scallop diver. I've done urchining. I go out fishing. And as a right of a citizen in New Hampshire, I think taking lobster is equal too. We have the same right as the lobstermen. They don't own them. I don't own them. The state owns them, or we have the right to them. So I feel that we should be able to take lobster by diving. We're not aggressive. We're not using dynamite. I've never seen a fellow diver, and I've been involved with a lot of divers, and I've never seen any of my diving friends taking lobster. And we don't club them. We don't, you know, it's really, this is not a aggressive, horrible undertaking about how we get them. And then when you look at the numbers and stuff, the amount of permits is pretty small. The amount of lobsters that we can actually take is very small. A diver taking recreational lobsters is not doing this every day of the week. We couldn't afford it. It's more expensive to dive for lobster than it is to go out and buy them. It's more of it's just like hunting, fishing, and lobstering, the same thing. So, thank you.
I come to this from a little bit different angle. I am a lifelong educator, retired from the schools of New Hampshire. I'm a naturalist. I am an eco-volunteer person, and I've been actively involved in this proposed legislation, various iterations of it for the last 30 years, having served as president of the New England Aquarium Dive Club, the United Divers of New Hampshire, and been part of many other organizations. I've volunteered for places like the Smithsonian, the New England Aquarium. I've done eco-volunteering where I see the value of citizen science. I see the value of people coming together who are apparently at absolute opposition with each other. And one of the things that I'm here to support is I don't care so much about, 100 permits and one lobster. That the lobster is not, how many lobster that a scuba diver could take is not my main issue. My main issue is bringing these two opposing forces or that are supposedly in opposition and having them understand that we're all in this together. Everybody has the same main goal, and that's to sustain the lobster population so that it's equally and fairly harvested, but at the same time meets the needs of everybody. I've always been puzzled by the fact that the state of New Hampshire can regulate scallops and fishing and hunting and all of the other resources so well, and for some reason lobsters are just like off the table of even discussion, and that's frustrating. I've actually been on decades ago, I helped some lobstermen who lost some pots and wanted to recover them, and we went down and we put some lines on them and brought them up and they recovered them. It's possible to work together, but first people have to be able to talk to each other. And I see this as a huge opportunity for the state of New Hampshire to get this process going where people are working together for the same common good.
I will be very brief. Thank you for taking my testimony. I'm Representative Tim Cahill for the record. I am testifying in favor of this legislation. And I'm here today because I was at the last hearing and there was a lot of stuff going on that was very concerning to me. And it reminded me of something that happened about 10 years ago to me. I was cleaning the beach with Surfrider Foundation. I'm a surfer. I'm an avid surfer on the seacoast, and we do a lot of beach cleanups. And one day I was cleaning the beach, and I was taking pictures of some abandoned lobster traps, and this gentleman drove up in this pickup truck on the beach, and he came up and wanted to know what I was doing in the lobster trap, and I told him I was just taking pictures of it. I'm a photographer, if anybody knows anything about me, but that's something I do. He then accused me of taking the lobsters out of his abandoned lobster trap on the beach. And at the time, I was like, what is going on here? But I saw that same attitude in the hearing last week. An attitude of, we own all this, people are stealing from us. I wasn't stealing from that gentleman. I actually then offered to help him pick up his lobster trap and put it in the back of his truck. And that was concerning because I saw the attitude that was displayed at the last hearing. And I just wanted to point out that there's 1.2 million citizens approximately in the state of New Hampshire, and we all have access and own those waters. They're not owned by any one group. The dive groups, they're small businesses as well. The surf shop, there was mention of surfers and stand-up paddle boards in the testimony last week, how they were getting in the way. Those are small businesses as well. People rent those. They teach people how to do those things. There's lots of small businesses, and one group shouldn't have control over all the groups. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming in. Bob Nudd. Michael. Oh. Did you testify last time, sir? Yeah. Mr. Nudd? Did you testify last time?
No. I did not. You can have all the video you want. I did not testify before this committee last week.
Okay, Mr. Nudd, go ahead.
My name is Bobby Nudd. Because of limited time, I'm only giving you a brief testimony, so I ask you to please read the attached document. This bill was originally introduced as a diving bill with a provision intended to defund enforcement of right whale rules. That portion would have sabotaged thousands of hours spent by New Hampshire representatives on the large whale take reduction team and result in severe implications for the New Hampshire lobster fishery. The diving part of that bill contained language that was not only confusing but unenforceable, but some that attacked the basic concepts in management of this resource. At the first House hearing, the defunding portion was removed, but the inappropriate language in the diving part remained. At the second hearing in the House, an amendment was introduced which attacked the lobster fishery in this state on false and misleading environmental grounds, but the objectionable and unenforceable diving language remained. Then on the House floor, the crafters described this bill not as a diving bill, but as an environmental bill to take focus away from the original intent. But they still did not improve the objectionable language. That bill is now before you. Incredibly enough, there have been other versions distributed along the way, one of which focuses on diving for lobsters with language that is almost acceptable and appears to be no longer attack the fishery. Because that version is not being considered, I have no idea what the intent was. Maybe another attempt to confuse the issue. The crafters of this bill have had multiple chances to make this bill, at least from a management and enforcement standpoint, acceptable, but instead they have chosen a different route. All being said, the basic objection to diving for lobsters still exists, and that is the method of harvest, active method versus passive method. I'm perplexed, dumbfounded, and extremely annoyed at this bill. It seems to me that a good, worthwhile piece of legislation would not need to be rewritten multiple times and would not need to create a ruse or distraction to move it along and gain passage along the way. Even an original sponsor has withdrawn because he and other House members who voted for the bill have realized the deception. If you read nothing else in my testimony that I've enclosed, please read the underlined paragraphs related to resource management. one concerning brood stock, and the other granting proxy authority to haul gear. Now, have I got 3 minutes? Okay, so, and just on the end, of all the talk about programs to address derelict gear, not one of these efforts have been legislated anywhere else. They have all been collaborative attempts, including fishermen, and at no time, in no jurisdiction, have divers been given authority outside of the collaborative programs on this gear. And thank you very much for taking my time, for taking the time.
I do not see anyone else on here that I have, and I don't want to miss anybody if they signed up. So is there anybody else who has signed up that I didn't see? Captain Eastman, did you or Lieutenant Brown want to speak?
I just have one thing, if I may.
You may, come on up.
3 minutes. Captain Michael Eastman, Hampshire Fish and Game Department Law Enforcement Division. I'm currently in charge of the OHRV program, but previous to that, I was the coastal lieutenant. Really, all I wanted to present with you, and I know it came in an email, but I just want to make sure that each and every one of you got this, was, and that is the email from Ellen Gaethel, who is, I think it's one of the best arguments I've heard in opposition of this bill. I just want to present that to you folks. I'm not going to rebut anything that I've heard today, but I just want to make sure that each and every one of you got a chance to see that outside of an email. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain. All right, anybody else?
From the first one or from the, I had signed up, like one of the other pages.
Okay, did you sign it today to speak?
Today's, yeah.
And you did not get called?
No.
Okay, I tried not to miss anybody. Come on up.
Okay.
There's a large sheet, and
Yeah, I'll keep it right.
I got the handoff in the middle, so I was trying to make sure I didn't miss anybody. Welcome, sir. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you for speaking with me. My name is Dave Coyle. I am owner of Aquatic Specialties, Merrimack, New Hampshire. I'm in support of this bill. I did hand out my arguments, and you guys can read that. I was going to read that, but in shortness of time and trying to be respectful for everybody, what I like to do is just kind of do a summary of it. Is that education is, I believe, is a big part of this that's missing. And there's arguments that divers are out there and diving around their buoys, and I have the ability to be able to teach the new divers today. All the new divers, I am educating them. I'm telling them how far away that we should be staying away from boats. I'm saying them, when a diver goes diving and they see a string of lobster pots, I am telling them, do not cross the lines. Stay off to the line. A lobster may be coming in and removing the traps. Safety features, right? The ability that I don't have is the divers that are already certified. By creating this bill, I would be able to already reach out to the people that are currently diving, that the divermen have concerns about and their complaints about are the divers that are already been diving. And this would give me ability to be able to work with them, educate them, and make sure that we are all working in a positive way. Because the reason I got involved in this was very simple. I go out diving almost every weekend, and I saw lobster traps, and I saw sculpin that went inside these traps that were going to lay eggs. They thought it was a safe place to go to be able to get away from predators. The trap was never going to be received. They were not going to be able to get out. And there was nothing I could do about it. People ask me to say, well, why can't we do this? And that's why I got involved, because the only way that we're going to get this to be better is to change it. And change is scary. I understand the lobstermen's their emotions and threaten that we're going to be taking their lobsters. The small amount of lobsters that we're going to be removing from the waterways and the benefits that we could be able to give to the lobstermen, I think outweighs that. It's an opportunity like hunting that I like to do with my boys. I could also do that as an activity to be able to do with scuba diving as well. Okay?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate it. Anybody else? All right, seeing none, we're going to close the hearing on House Bill 442. Well, that's all we have today as a committee, and thank you all. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, I didn't know it. I just.